How many participants will join us today?
The registration already 500, Pak.
Okay.
It's a lot, yeah.
Now I hope you can see my screen now. Is it shared? Can anyone confirm, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Clean and clear.
I guess I'll start.
Yeah, think so.
Yes, please. Already 11, Dinar. Time is yours.
So good evening, good afternoon, and good morning here from London. Kindly allow me to introduce myself briefly. I'm Dinar Adeline. You can always call me Dinar. Personally, I'm a government officer in Directorate General of Taxes in Indonesia, also a master's graduate from London School of Economics. I will be the moderator this very exciting taxation, fiscal policy, and governance chamber for the next 90 minutes. First and first, I would like to give a very warm welcome to all the attendants here in the room to the 20th ISIC, Indonesian Scholars International Conventions, with this year's theme of Indonesia Leveling Up, Enhancing Indonesia's Crisis Resilience. This event is presented by the Indonesian Students Association in the UK, sponsored by BNI London Branch, University of Nottingham, Ministry of Tourism and Creative Economy of the Republic of Indonesia. This particular chamber where you are in now is supported by Indonesian Tax Center in the UK, or Intact UK and Dani Darussalam Tax Center. So a little bit about the background on our discussion today. For the past 1.5 years, there has been no more pressing issue than the pandemic. It exposes every country to a problem they have never encountered before. Questions arises on the credibility of the institutions and at the same time challenge the economy. I think one of the key policies that the governments around the world are focusing is the tax policy. For the past 10 years, we have witnessed the most rapid development of digital economy. However, I believe the tax share that this big digital company contributes to the countries in which they're operating is very, very low. Indonesia, in fact, is the biggest digital market in Southeast Asia, and we share this concern. So OECD, welcome one of our OECD members here. OECD plays a very vital role to address this issue by initiating an international tax reform known as the Inclusive Framework. The good news is that a week ago, I guess, July 1st, there are 130 countries issued a statement to support this reform. If everything goes as planned, it could be like killing two birds with one stone. So it's reforming the tax system for multinational companies, especially digital tech companies, and restoring a fairer tax system. And two, of course, helping the countries affected by the pandemic to raise up and raise additional revenue. So today's discussion will focus on the issue of governing digital economy challenges, how the situation is international level, and how Indonesia has been keeping up with the latest development. A very warm welcome to our speakers of the day. Incredible lineup, Mr. Nufran Sawira Sakti, Mr. David Bradbury, Mr. Bawono Kristiaji, and Mr. Iqbal Sanli Mutar. I will introduce them more later on their turn, but I will quickly share the agenda of the day. So everyone attending this chamber is of course allowed to participate. You could always ask the questions in the chat box. However, we would ask your understanding to always keep the microphone muted in order to give full attention to our lovely speakers. I would provide 20 minutes Q&A session after all the speakers deliver their material. Each speakers have 15 minutes, and please pardon if I have to interrupt you in the middle of your presentations if time is running out. Few best questions of the day will be given a brilliant book written by a tax practitioner, Mr. Gatot Subroto. In fact, he's here joining us today, titled Pajak dan Pendanaan Peradaban Indonesia. Even better, we will have a raffle for one lucky participant to get a book voucher, and 10 lucky attendants will get a chance to get another raffle and get some pretty cool grand prize. So for your information, this event will be recorded and will later be available to view on YouTube. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Nufran Sawirasakti. He's a tax supervisory advisor for Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. He would provide us a perspective of the regulations in place in Indonesia to address digital economy. Exciting. So, Mr. Nufran, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Dinar. Thank you all for the committee to give me the opportunity to share about the recent updates of taxation in the digitalization of the economy in Indonesia. It's my great opportunity to meet you all. Good afternoon. As mentioned by Dinar before, that Indonesia also have an advantage to give the participation in inclusion framework for the digitalization of economy in the tax revenue. So in my presentation today, we would like to share about the several topics about how Indonesia deal with the taxation of digital economy in Indonesia. The first is about the background, and then continued by the regulation of electronic transaction tax or ETT in Indonesia, and also what are the challenges in implementing ETT in Indonesia. And the last part is about the response towards the global consensus that have made on the 1st of July last week. So the first is about the background. So the challenges of Indonesia is I think almost all the same with the other countries because of the digitalization of the economy, especially from the business of e-commerce, continuously increasing value of digital transactions, and income generated therefore allegedly do not bear an equal share of the tax levy compared to brick and mortar business. It has augmented the policy rationale of the government of Indonesia to design an effective mechanism for taxing the digital economy to provide a level playing field, of course. Another reason is the potential tax revenue from digital-based business activities that could be a prominent source of funds amidst the needs of funds in the era of coronavirus in the pandemic nowadays. However, part of international community implementing such policies is not that easy. This is the topic that I would like to share with you all. And the challenges not only about the increasing number of business, but also how to deal with the worldwide business that penetrate market with the little or no physical presence even in Indonesia. And also according to the research from the base erosion and profit shifting, lost revenue from the e-commerce transaction is about 100 to 240 billion from the OECD, and also 600 billion from the IMF, and also the study from the level from UNCTAD is about 200 billion. So this is the huge amount of number of losing from the e-commerce transaction. Then how we can deal with this? The next one. So starting, maybe all of you already know about the timeline of global consensus that started from July 2013 when the G20 gave the mandate to OECD to have the action plan for establish the inclusive framework started on July 2013. That also this is the long journey. Even though we had so many discussion, also meeting, but the final report that that we want to have in 2020 last year to have the global consensus, but it's not being established. So on the 11th meeting on January 21, we have a kind of the light. So after the the new government of Joe Biden seems like they are ready to have a global consensus. It seems that we need to have some of the some of regulation that need to have to deal with. In this global consensus on July, we have some idea that we need to give the some measurement so that everybody can apply and implement the global consensus during next year. So the unilateral measures for the next global consensus already defined in this picture. So as we can see, according to study, many countries have proposed or adopted measures for income taxes like digital service taxes, equalization device, and advertising taxes. As we can see in here, Indonesia also have implemented the legislation enacted. As we know, we have law number 2 that's already enacted, but not implemented yet. As we know that we still waiting until the global consensus being established during this year. From many countries, only nine countries not agreed about the global consensus. So next one. How about the regulation in Indonesia? So starting last year, because of the pandemic from COVID-19, we proposed to the government resolution in lieu of law, or we call it Perpu 1 of 2020, which consists of some of the social safety net, health, and that needs responding to COVID-19, national revenue purpose, then economic recovery program. So our government, including DG Taxes, try to propose some of the policy that need to be extraordinary measure for fight the adverse economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia, and to deal with the threats that are potentially harmful to the national economy and all the stability of the financial system. Then on 12 May 2020, the House of People Representative, or DPR, passed the Perpu into law, what we call it the Law Number 2, 2020. The regulation is designed to encompass essential purposes and to lay down legal fundamental for taking necessary measures, including social safety net, health needs responding to COVID, national revenue purpose, and economic recovery related the measure. According to Article 4 of Law Number 2 of 2020 law, the legal basis for tax policy in the form of tax on e-commerce policies in the field of taxation as referred to in Article 1 paragraph consists of the first, adjustment on income tax rate for corporation and permanent establishment. Second, the tax treatment on e-commerce through electronic system, or PMSA in Indonesian bahasa. Extension on exercise of rights and fulfillment of obligation on taxation, and also authority grant to Ministry of Finance to provide custom facilities in the form of import duty exemption or relief in the effort of emergency measure and economic recovery and strengthening program. In details, provision regulates tax treatment on e-commerce is on Article 6 of Law Number 2. The provision therein includes a legal ground for income tax on e-commerce, or ETT, important definition of PMSA, or also offshore service provider and offshore tax seller, and also the most important thing, the significant economic presence, obligation to pay tax and to report, and also mandate provide for government regulation and Ministry of Finance regulation. According to this law, income tax or electronic transaction tax for the EST transaction which are conducted by foreign tax subjects who fulfill the criteria of significant economic presence. There are three. First, the certain amount of consolidated gross circulation of business group. sales in Indonesia for certain amount, and also active users of digital media in Indonesia for certain amount. Both the income tax and electronic transaction tax will be calculated against the amount received by the foreign tax subjects for the goods or services sold through the EST. But the difference between the third is that the electronic transaction tax will be imposed to foreign tax subjects whose country of origin has tax treaty with Indonesian government that prohibits the Indonesian government to stipulate the foreign tax subject as permanent and discipline in Indonesia. Hence, the electronic transaction tax will only be imposed to the foreign tax subject if they cannot be stipulated as permanent establishment due to the tax treaty. Otherwise, the income tax will be imposed. So the next slide. Indonesian regulation on entity and also global consensus on digital economy, as according to law number 2, stipulates that the further regulation on, among others, the rates and also the calculation of the income tax and electronic transaction will be further governed in government regulation. So it's not implemented yet. We are waiting to government regulation, including also the Ministry of Finance regulation. Nevertheless, despite the enactment of legal provision to actuate our taxing right on income derived through electronic taxation, the implementation cannot be actuated until the necessary implementing regulation is promulgated in the form of government regulation or Ministry of Finance regulation. The implementing regulation has not yet been enacted for our commitment to postpone unilateral measure for taxing digital economy as to support the underworked global consensus. So what are the challenges in implementing ETT in Indonesia? As we can see, we have 3 kind of challenges. The first one is how to characterize the income derived from the new business model. Product and services can be provided to customer in new ways through digital technology. The digital economy has enabled monetization in new ways, and this raises questions regarding both the rationale behind existing categorization of income and also consistency of treatment of similar types of transaction. And also the second one is the administrative challenges, especially how to determine the fulfillment of significant freshen criteria. The first challenge is ensuring that the criteria in the implementing regulation are set out by upholding fairness and tax certainty principle, which ensuring that the criteria one and another would work properly for determination of parties that are eligible to pay electronic taxation tax. This is how we can also develop the tax administrator, how they are going to measure, for example, the income and also share and also give the number how the sales of the M&E companies that work globally, especially the part of Indonesian sales, for example. And also how to, even the identification of parties also difficult, and it may also be difficult to ascertain the extent of sales or other activities without information from the offshore sellers, as there may be no sales or other accounting records held in the local jurisdiction, otherwise accessible by the local revenue authority. And also information collection and verification also difficult. Yes?
Apologize, Mr. Franz. You still have 3 minutes to go. Thank you.
Okay, and then the next slide is about how we are going to respond global consensus, especially for the pillar 1 that already agreed from last week on July 1st. In scope of companies are the multinational enterprises or M&E with global turnover above 20 billion euros and profitability 10%, profit before tax or revenue. And then the turnover threshold to be reduced to 10 billion euros, contingent on successful implementation, including of tax certainty on Amendment A, with the relevant review beginning 7 years after the agreement comes into force, and the review being completed in no more than 1 year. And also the effective and regulated financial services are excluded So we are also agree with this the scope, and the nexus are there will be a new special purpose nexus rule permitting allocating of amount A to a market jurisdiction when in scope MNE derive at least 1 million euros in revenue from that jurisdiction. And also for small jurisdiction with GDP lower than 40 billion euros, the nexus will be set at 250,000 euros. And the special purpose nexus rules apply solely to determine whether a jurisdiction qualifies for the amount A allocation. So Indonesia categorized as the first one for the nexus. And also compliance costs, including tracing small amounts of sales, will be limited to a minimum. And also in the Pillar 1, the quantum are for in scope of MNE between 20 to 30%. It's not determined the fixed number yet of residual profit defined as profit in excess of 10% of revenue will be allocated to a market jurisdiction with nexus using a revenue-based allocation key. And also for the unilateral measures, this package will provide for appropriate coordination between the application of the new international tax rules and the removal of all the digital tax service taxes and other relevant similar measures of all companies. And the implementation, the multilateral instrument through which amount A is implemented will be developed and open for signature in 2020 with amount A coming into effect in 2023. This time may be at the same time when Indonesia hosting the G20 during next year. So Indonesian response towards global consensus respect the commitment to support the collaborative effort to address tax challenges from digital economy. And also Indonesia is the endeavor to look through the proposed solution, taking into account the interests of Indonesia. So as long as there is simplicity and also certainty, Indonesia will support the implemented of a global consensus sometimes during next year, especially when we hosting the G20 in 2020, and also will be enacted maybe or implemented in 2023. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Franz. That was very enlightening. So in sum, I guess Indonesia has been very focused on recovering from the pandemic through all the social incentives, but we will be supporting the global consensus and will be further governed by the Ministry of Finance. Although it hasn't been enacted just yet, we look forward to the implementation itself. So for the next speaker, I would like to welcome Mr. David Bradbury. He was previously a treasurer for Australian government, our neighbor country, in fact, and he is now the head of Tax Policy and Statistics Division from OECD. After Mr. Franz described about how it is like in Indonesia in terms of regulation for tax for digital economy, Mr. David would share us the landscape of digital tax reform, hopefully with the most current update, the latest G7 and G20 consensus. Mr. David, the stage is yours.
Well, thanks very much, and it's great to be able to join you for this event today. I am actually based in my apartment in Paris due to the pandemic, but in order to give you a sense of where typically the negotiations at the OECD take place, I have the chateau in the background. And it has been challenging for us to carry out negotiations on international tax reform over the last 18 months virtually. But notwithstanding that, significant progress has been made, as you just heard in the presentation just a few minutes ago. What I would like to share with you is a little bit more of the broader international context that underpins the latest state of play. And indeed, as was mentioned earlier, on the 1st of July, just over a week ago, 130 jurisdictions signed up to a new framework agreement, which involves two pillars. Now, I can share with you today that that 130 jurisdictions has grown to 131. And that means that within the inclusive framework on BEPS, the 139 jurisdictions, there are now only 8 jurisdictions that have not yet joined the framework. And we certainly are working closely with each of those jurisdictions to try and ensure that we can bring everyone on board and hopefully deliver a multilateral consensus. Now, my presentation today, there's a bit of detail in the slides, and I'm more than happy for the slides to be circulated, but I won't speak to the detail of all of them, but the information is there. And you've just heard in the previous presentation some information about Pillar 1 in particular. I guess before I get into the detail of what it is that is the subject of the current agreement and will be the subject of the ongoing negotiations, I wanted to just paint a little bit of a picture of the background as to why it is that we've been having this discussion over what is almost the last decade, if you like, at the international level. The BEPS project was initiated back in 2012, 2013, and a series of reports were delivered in 2015, and they have been implemented by all members of the inclusive framework on BEPS. But the underlying issues that have brought us to this discussion really go back to some of the changes that have been occurring in our economy, in the global economy, as a result of digitalisation and globalisation. And in particular, these two forces have really challenged one of the central premises of the international tax rules, and that is the notion of physical presence. So 100 years ago, when the international tax architecture that we now still have in place was put in place, the emphasis at the time was to allocate taxing rights based on physical presence. So that would either typically involve the location where a company was headquartered, or to the extent that it was carrying out activities in a non-headquartered jurisdiction, it would typically be required to have some physical presence. And the concept of permanent establishment is often used in order to evidence that physical presence. But of course, the world has changed. It's changed dramatically. Digitalisation and globalisation have meant that firms can perhaps not have a physical presence in our jurisdiction, but be doing a huge amount of business and generating a huge amount of profit. And that has given rise to more calls for the ability to allocate taxing rights in a way that reflects that new reality. Now, I should say one of the main reasons why we have international tax rules to the extent that they are in place is to ensure that we do not have double taxation. If cross-border activity occurs between two jurisdictions, then as sovereign nations, if both jurisdictions seek to tax that activity, then we'll have double taxation. We know from history that that impairs growth and investment, and it holds back the global economy. So it's important that companies pay tax, but we want to make sure that they're not paying tax twice, so that we can have secure government revenues, but at the same time support investment, trade, and economic growth. Now, the BEPS project was very successful, but there were some outstanding issues that remain. And the key questions around physical presence were certainly at the forefront of those issues. And that, of course, led to ongoing dissatisfaction. And where there is dissatisfaction, countries as sovereign nations will seek to exercise their power. And that has led to a whole range of unilateral actions. And in particular, digital services taxes have been the best example of that, or the worst example, depending upon which perspective you bring. Unfortunately, with the proliferation of those digital services taxes, we have also seen trade retaliation emerge as a real threat to the global economy. And these twin forces of countries acting on their own in the absence of multilateral agreement and the trade retaliation of partner countries has really elevated this issue of international tax to the highest levels of discussion. The G7, the G20, the OECD inclusive framework on BEPS. Now, in the modelling that we did at the OECD Secretariat in October last year, we estimated that under a worst case scenario, the trade retaliation responses to unilateral measures could actually reduce global economic growth by 1%. So that's global GDP being reduced by 1% in the worst case scenario. Now, all of that has been the background that's been building and the tension that's been building behind what is now a growing consensus towards a solution. And last week we had the 130, now 130 jurisdictions on board. All G7, all G20 countries, and of course, as we heard, as Indonesia will take on the presidency of the G20, this will be an important part of Indonesia's presidency as we move forward. Those countries that have signed up collectively represent more than 90% of global GDP. Now, what is it that countries have been signing up to? And yes, there are still some issues to be resolved, but in broad principles, there's a two-pillar solution. Pillar one seeks to reallocate taxing rights to allow a share of profits to be taxed in market jurisdictions. And this is focused on the largest and the most profitable multinationals in the world. And this rule will apply with a new nexus that will operate independently of physical presence, which will really be bringing the international tax rules into the 21st century and making them fit for purpose as we move into an increasingly digitalised world. And of course, the pandemic has shown us how digitalisation has only been accelerating. Now, the OECD estimates that that will reallocate taxing rights on profits of more than $100 billion. So a significant amount of taxing rights will shift from countries, and in particular, there will be an increased ability of market jurisdictions to tax. Now, Pillar 2 is directed more towards addressing some of the concerns around tax competition and remaining BEPS issues. And Pillar 2 is focused on implementing a minimum effective global tax. Now, this is not to eliminate tax competition. It is really to ensure that there is a floor or there are some limits on tax competition. And we know that aggressive tax competition between countries can erode the base of other countries, and there are cross-border spillovers that emerge as a result of this. Now, the countries that have signed on to a minimum rate of at least 15%, which is very ambitious. I read a lot in various articles from groups saying it should be higher than that. But one point I want to emphasise is that this is not a statutory rate. This is an effective rate. And there are many countries that have statutory rates that are much higher than 15%, but they have companies operating in their jurisdiction that are paying effective tax rates that are much lower than 15%. So an effective tax rate of 15%, personally, I think this is very ambitious, and it's something that I'm very pleased countries are signing up to explore. In terms of the revenue gains, at 15%, we estimate that would produce an additional $150 billion of revenue each year globally. Now, obviously, that'll be shared amongst countries, so it's not, for Indonesia, there will be a share of that. But this is a significant amount of money. And if you look at the figures of estimates of what BEPS constitutes, or the amount of BEPS that the economy has been absorbing over the years, this will be a significant breakthrough in addressing those issues. So that's the high level background. Now, on the next couple of slides, I have more detail in terms of the specifics of the two pillars. But given the time constraints, I won't go through that in detail. I'll focus in on what I think are the most important features. So on Pillar 1, we've already heard that this will affect around 100 multinationals to begin with, just over 100. And to be in scope, you'll have to have a turnover threshold to be above 20 billion euros and to have profitability above 10%. So the largest and most profitable multinationals will be in scope. There will be a review beginning in 7 years after this comes into effect to be completed within 1 year. And that will be focused on whether or not to lower that threshold to 10 billion, which obviously would expand the number of companies that would be within scope. There are exclusions for extractives and regulated financial services. I saw a question on the chat about this, and I should say that there's always been a recognition that with extractives, questions of physical presence have not really been an issue because taxing rights typically accrue in relation to products that are embedded in the ground. So physical presence is necessary in those instances, and the principle has been less applicable in that case. For regulated financial services, there are a whole range of regulations that ensure capital requirements within jurisdictions, but there's also the added complication that a profit before tax to turnover measure is simply not an appropriate measure for financial services, and I think that's widely accepted. Now, the new nexus that will be introduced will give a taxing right, regardless of physical presence, to jurisdictions where these firms, in-scope firms, have a turnover in your jurisdiction above €1 million, or for smaller jurisdictions with GDP under 40 billion euros, where there is more than 250,000 euros of turnover. And as we heard earlier, the amount to be reallocated, the share that will be taxable in market jurisdictions, is to be decided, but it's between 20 and 30%. Importantly, there will be new tax certainty arrangements to try and ensure that companies that are brought into this amount A of Pillar 1 will have greater tax certainty, and we will be also looking to streamline the way in which the administration of these arrangements will occur. Unilateral measures will need to be withdrawn, DSTs, and this will hopefully bring peace to the international tax and trade landscape. Hopefully this will bring an end to the retaliatory trade responses that we've seen. And there is, of course, Amount B with further work to be completed by the end of 22, which is about bringing simplified and streamlined approach to the way transfer pricing's arm's length principle applies to in-country baseline marketing and distribution activities. And these measures are proposed to be implemented through a multilateral instrument open for signature next year and coming into effect in 2023. Now, Pillar 2 is the minimum tax, and I won't go through the details of the rules because I'm running out of time. But importantly, in-scope firms will be those that have a turnover threshold above 750 million euros. The globe rules will not be mandatory for all countries to implement. They'll be a common approach, and the idea is that if you implement these, you should do it in a way that's in line with what has been agreed multilaterally. It actually does not matter if tax havens do not implement these arrangements. The way the rules are designed is to give other jurisdictions the ability to top up the tax rate to the minimum if taxes are not being paid up to that minimum level in other jurisdictions. So basically, if a jurisdiction doesn't implement the minimum tax, they are giving other countries a right to tax that profit up to the minimum. But in the end, the companies will be required to pay that minimum regardless of where they operate. This will be an effective tax rate test, as I said earlier, and the minimum rate will be at least 15%. There will be a carve-out to reflect the fact that where actual substance-based activities are occurring in jurisdictions, some recognition of that will occur. And there will be a consideration of whether the US guilty regime is a qualifying regime or a coexisting regime to ensure a level playing field. Importantly, there is agreement on the subject to tax rule, which will be important for countries in market jurisdictions. And this will allow where the nominal CIT rates apply to certain payments, defined payments, interest, royalties, and other defined payments, will give jurisdictions the right to tax up to an amount between 7.5% and 9%, which is a gross form of taxation, but is still comparable with what would otherwise be the minimum rate of 15% or greater. And when it comes to implementation, the idea is that there will be an implementation plan with a view towards bringing this into effect in 2022 and 2023. So I'll leave my remarks there. I also have in the slides some links for further reading, but perhaps just one concluding remark to say that the G20 is actually, the finance ministers are meeting as we speak today. They're meeting in Venice, and we are hopeful that their communique will be further evidence of G20 support for this work. We are moving towards having another inclusive framework meeting before the next meeting of the G20 finance ministers in October. And it's our ambition and our hope that we can reach a finalised agreement on all of the details of this arrangement by October this year, so that we can meet that ambitious implementation deadline, which of course will be something that will be left to be carried out by the Indonesian presidency as it takes up the presidency of the G20 at the end of this year. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to join you, and I'm happy to participate in the Q&A session a little later on.
Thank you so much, Mr. David. Very insightful, thought-provoking. But I think it's really good news for Indonesia, because I hope we all can reach a multilateral agreement even without the 9 jurisdictions that disagree. But it is certainly a big homework for Indonesia government, because we still have a lot of regulations to put in place and to pass. And I think we all agree that this is an urgent matter, and it also would probably help Indonesia to raise from the pandemic. This is a recovery measure. So I will now invite our third speaker. So after 2 perspectives of policymakers, I'd like to invite Mr. Bawono Kristiaji. He's the partner of Tax Research and Training Services at Dhani Darussalam Tax Center. And he will provide us a really good perspective of the development of digital tax from the taxpayers' perspective. So, Mr. Bawono, stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Dinar. Good afternoon, good morning for all the participants. Thank you for the opportunity that has given to me to share my perspective on the transforming Indonesia tax system to address the digital economy challenges. Well, perhaps this is a disclaimer that I will not only share my perspective as a taxpayer, but also from the policy making process in this kind of digital economy problem. So let me start the presentation. Okay, so well, as mentioned by Mbak Dinar already before, that the coronavirus pandemic, the pandemic itself is, I believe, is like a catalyst to ensure and also to speed up the global consensus on the digital economy taxation in this international tax framework. But it also bring many countries a new perspective on how they can taxing the digital economy, not only from the perspective of the base erosion and profit shifting and the digital economy, but also on the sharing and the gig economy. Well, of course, when we talk about the pandemic itself, we knew that the digital or the giant digital technology companies receive profit or windfall profit during the crisis or the pandemic, because well, as we all know, we have to have like a social distancing and also the lockdown program from the government. But on the other hand, we knew that the government from all countries, including the Indonesia, also feel that the pandemic has give a pressure to the fiscal and the budget balance on the economy. For instance, that the government also the fiscal deficit in Indonesia is spread up and increased from the 3% based on the Undang-Undang Keuangan Negara. And we know that in Indonesia last year, we already enacted the law number 2 regarding the digital economy taxation. So the main news on the law number 2 about the digital economy taxation, as we know that the VAT on the digital products has already being implemented by the Minister of Finance Regulation number 48. And also the primary legislation on the income tax for the cross-border digital business, and also the ETT, electronic transaction tax. But the electronic transaction tax, it's only for the primary legislation, but we until now we don't have the implementing regulation, as Pak Frans already mentioned before. But the digital economy taxation itself is not about how to ensure the contribution of the tax revenue. Because when we see the digital ecosystem, especially in the developing countries such as Indonesia, we know that the digital economy also give a positive contribution to the economy. First, the implication to the productivity, job opportunity, and the economic growth, and also the implication to the access to the market. For instance, that like the peer-to-peer lending, and also how to ensure that the small medium enterprises can probably promote their products and services, and also to the shadow economy. Well, I believe that the digital economy give pressure to the tax authority. How can they trace the economic activities of the society? Because most of the time, there is a slightly change from the conventional transaction to the digital transaction. But on the other hand, the digital economy also reduce the cash economy. So that is good because all the transaction can be recorded and documented. Lastly, the implication for the income distribution. So this is about the equal opportunity and also how the tax system can ensure the equal tax treatment to all the activities in the economy. But again, this creates a dilemma from the government side, from the policymakers, of course, because on the one hand, we know that the digital economy creates a positive contribution to the economy, but on the other hand, how can we ensure their contribution to the tax revenue? For instance, this dilemma can be seen by the revocation of the Minister of Finance number 210 2018, as we know that based on that regulation, the government or tax authority give obligations to the digital platform to recap and also to document all the transactions on their platforms. But it already revoked before the okay. And also about the for instance, the tax holiday incentive also provide to the new capital investment on the digital economy. So again, we should be more careful about should we optimize this tax revenue from the digital economy, or we can and how to balance that the digital economy should be can be medium to give the economy contribution to the Indonesian. Okay, but today's presentation, I will only look at the 2 points. One is the international tax reform on the BEPS project, and also the sharing and gig economy. Okay, this is the second slide. Well, before we talk about the complexities on the BEPS and the digital economy and how this creates a pathway to reform the international tax system, we should understand that the digital economy itself is not the only problem of the current international tax system. So when we talk about the pillar 1 and pillar 2, we can see that that is why there is like the minimum tax and so on, and about the allocation of profit and so on. So let me start with the tax competition and how it is relates to the BEPS and digitalization debate. Because when we talk about the tax competition, every countries have the tax sovereignty. So with the jargon of the tax sovereignty, all countries can set their corporate income tax tariff, can provide like the tax incentive to R&D deduction and so on. So with the tax competition still continues, it enlarged the risk of the BEPS and the digitalization issues. And the second one about the opportunities for the BEPS, we can recall about the scheme of the Starbucks Apple, about the double Irish and Dutch sandwich. So regarding on this kind of digitalization issues. And perhaps for the developing countries, we should consider that the developing countries depends more on the CIT revenue, so from the corporate income tax revenue compared to the developed countries. So when this digitalization problem, digital economic taxation problem is not solved, developing countries will face distinct challenges. And also the political economy of taxing rights. But again, the issue on the BEPS and the digitalization debate is not about the taxing rights itself. The taxing rights is, in my perspective, is how each country is entitled to the pizza. But again, the problem is not about the entitlement of the pizza, but how much the slice of pizza they can get. So that is why from the for the last 5 years, we knew that there were quite debates, large debates on the how to have a solution on this kind of problem. From the multilateralism perspective, we knew that the OECD already play important role to create the blueprints. Well, of course, global problems should be resolved with the global solutions, of course. And also the pillar 1 and pillar 2, or as already mentioned by Mr. David, we know that it is a complex solution, but and also it creates a political tension between the countries, of course, probably as Mr. David already mentioned before. But on the other hand, we have bilateral solutions provided by the UN. So the UN also released new article 12B, about the withholding tax mechanism solution to ensure the source jurisdiction can get at least some of the tax base from the automated digital transaction, digital services. On the other hand, we know that the several countries already released and introduced the unilateral perspective about the digital services tax, and also about the significant economic presence test and so on. But again, with this kind of unilateral measure, it can create like a double taxation, and perhaps okay, this is a simple solution, I believe. But again, the welfare loss from the societies will be greater than before. Because when we talk about the digital services tax, it's about the final tax on the payment to the digital services abroad. So that is why that when we talk about the final tax, of course, the price of the digital services will be rise and so on. So,
Mr. Bawono, sorry to cut you. I think you have 3 minutes more.
Okay, 3 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Again, well, I also appreciate that on the 1st of July, we have like probably semi-consensus on this kind of the international tax system, because we know that there is still a problem on the technical issues about how to allocation the profit, and also the scope, and also the and so on. So So probably we should wait for the global consensus, and I believe that the Indonesia should follow this multilateral solution. Okay, so next slide, I would like to share you about the sharing and the gig economy, because most of the time, the discussion on the digital economy taxation is about the VAT on digital products and also the global consensus on the BEPS and digital taxation. But how about the sharing and gig economy? Because based on the statistic, we know that the market of digital economy in Indonesia is large, and this is the biggest market in the Southeast Asia, as Mbak Nina mentioned before. So, but again, the discussion on this kind of sharing and gig economy is until now is not very clear and very interested to the other policymakers. So how about what is the sharing and gig economy? So the main issue is the transaction of value between the two private parties using an intermediary in the form of the digital platform. So the keywords is that there is a digital platform play important role as the intermediary to connecting the supply and demand. So when we talk about this kind of definition, digital platform, sorry.
One more minute, sorry, sir.
Okay, digital platform knew that any kind of information and transaction done in their ecosystem. So probably we could the solution on this kind of the sharing and gig economy is not no additional tax, no new tax, but administrative solution. For instance, that the withholding tax and simplified regime. So several countries already introduced the withholding mechanism, and to give obligation to the digital platform to withhold the revenue tax, VAT, and also the income tax to their merchants. So probably this will be an issue that talk during the revision on the general and tax procedure law during this time. So there will be a new regulation on this, but we can wait. I hope that the government can give a solution on how to taxing the sharing and gig economy. So that's it, my presentation. Sorry for extension time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bawono Kristiaji and Lightning. Actually, I would like to highlight a bit of from your presentation. I think one most interesting things that I listened to is the trade-off between the tax holiday incentives that the governments are giving to these digital economies, these digital companies, and trying to get more state revenue and how to balance that up. And of course, Indonesia, many of the digital companies in Indonesia are basically also a gig economy companies. So that could be a double homework. And I think we look forward to the global consensus, as Mr. David said earlier, would be happening in October. And because Indonesia is holding the G20 presidency, it's going to be very exciting for us, especially those who are working in the tax administration. I would like to invite our last speaker of the day. He is the expert from Indonesian Tax Center in the UK, happened to be my friend, and he would share us and probably more academical perspective on taxing digital economy, Mr. Iqbal Sanlimutar. Mr. Iqbal, without further ado, you can continue.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Dina. And good morning, everyone. I think, first of all, I have to congratulate David for the good work in the OECD. I think it's a very monumental achievement. If you are asking, or if you come to the OECD 10 years ago and asking whether I can have a market-based tax, I think you will be claiming me as a crazy person, but today we kind of living the very old traditional systems and try to reach the new global tax system. In a sense, I have to congratulate Mr. Franz also, since the G20 was the one who gave the mandate for the inclusive framework, and Indonesia is one of the members of the G20. So congratulations for Mr. Franz for the reach of consensus in the inclusive framework on the beginning of this month. So Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the UK, even said that this is when the G7 agreed on the meeting on June, he said that we already take the global tax systems into the 21st century, and then now the right company will pay the right tax in the right place. So that's a very big claim, actually. So my focus today will be on whether it is really happened, whether that's actually really has been achieved. So where to go from here after the consensus has been reached? To be honest, it's not really finished. There are a lot of things that need to be discussed. I tried to pinpoint some of the issues here regarding the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. The first one that I would like to point out to you is the 15% for the global minimum tax rate in the Pillar 2. Will it be enough? Will it be sufficient for the developing countries to gain the tax revenue they needed after the pandemic hit the world? And then the second one will be, will it really end the unilateral measures? Will we see no DST anymore? And the threshold increase after the US jump on the wagon for the global consensus from 750 million euros to 20 billion euros. That's a very steep increase. Who will be the subject of the Pillar 1? And will the subject to tax rule really keep developing countries happy? As claimed by the OECD, it's one of the vital instruments that to reach the consensus, the developing countries need this one STTR to be applied in the Pillar 2. Is it really that important, or will it really keep the developing countries happy? And then the coexisting with the GLT, the US GLT, what could it bring? So for the first one, let's see the 15% global minimum tax rate. So this is actually only 2.5% higher than the Republic of Ireland effective tax rate. And as we know, Ireland is always top of the town when talking about the digital company. So what will happen to amount access to global minimum tax rate? Like Indonesia has 22 corporate income tax rate, and we still minus 7%. Can we collect that 7%, or we just limit it to the 15% as being stated in the Pillar 2? And then the big differences in potential tax collected. This is from the EU tax observatory, as you can see in the picture, that with the current global minimum tax rate, Indonesia will probably, this is only a potency, so we don't really know whether it is the exact number that Indonesia will collect, but it is only 0.1 billion of euros. It's not really that much for Indonesia. It's around 1.7 trillion rupiah. It's way below the deficit and the fund that we needed, compared to 21% that the US initially promote. We can get 0.3, and if it's 25%, then we will have 0.9. Still, we only have almost 1 billion euros, which around 17 trillion of rupiah. And that's only Indonesia. How about the other developing countries? Whether the 15% it's really good enough, it's really big enough. I think that's one question that we will have to wait patiently to be answered. And there's also rule that country where the M&E headquarters are located can apply the IIR, the income inclusion rule. even though it not really past the threshold. So it's also interesting to see where most of the M&E headquarters are located. Is it the developed country or the developing country? Since it's quite a strong rule when you don't reach the threshold, but you still can apply the Pillar 2. It's a very strong one, and who will be really benefited from that? I think we have to see it in the next future. And then will it end the unilateral measures? To be honest, I don't really understand the concept of the inclusive framework. Does it has binding power? I mean, the consensus has been reached, but I don't know whether it's mandatory for all the IF members to adopt the consensus. And if they don't, what the consequences will be. And also, as I understand, the IF members are working in participatory way. So there is no fuse in that, and the different concept of consensus, like for example, in the WTO, if we have consensus, it means that every member that attend the meeting doesn't have any objection for the final result. But in the inclusive framework, we know that from 139 countries, only 131 updated from David this morning that doesn't object with the final result. So it's quite different kind of consensus. With WTO, it's once it's been stated, all the member needs to follow the rule. I don't know whether it will be the same with the inclusive framework. Will it really end all of the DST? We will have to see. And a sudden spike in the threshold of Pillar 1 from 750 to 20 billion is really high actually. So who will be the subject of the Pillar 1? I have to rely on similar endeavors on this one. They said that 78 of the world's 500 largest company will be the subject only. So it's not even 100 biggest company in the world, only 78. And the allocation of the amount A so far is around $87 billion. 70% of that $87 billion generated by the US headquarter M&E, and 28 billion generated from the 5 largest US tech companies, which is actually a very good point because at the first OECD tried to target the automated digitalized business and the consumer facing business. So it's good that the 5 largest US tech company is included in this Pillar 1. So that will be Apple, Microsoft, the Intel, Facebook, and then Alphabet. Similar endeavors also state that return on earning, it's probably could provide a larger tax base compared to return on sales. And as we see now that we use the return on sales, they stated that if we apply the return on earning, we can target it twice numbers in the European company compared to what we have now. So there is a chance to increase the revenue from the Pillar 1. Subject to tax rule, that's the weapon to keep the developing country happy. But we need to see defined set of other payments. What would it be aside from the royalty and the interest? What would it be? And we have to remember that the one that can be taxed is the related party transactions, is a related party payment. So there will be a problem within the contract scheme and everything. It's not a new issue. It's always been like that. With the big M&E, they can always have a freedom to make the contract. It's not always stating it's interest, but it could be interest. It's not always stating it's a royalty, but indeed it is a royalty. So whether it will create a dispute, even though we already tried to simplify it by the STTR, whether it is really easy to developing countries to just get the adding revenue from this STTR. So will 7.5 to 9% be enough? Is it small enough? Is it big enough? Is it whether it is a cumulative one, whether it is for every transaction? So let's say that if you got the payment of interest and then into the payment for royalty also, will it be 18% for you, or will it be cumulatively 9%. So it could be overtax, but it could be also you got almost nothing, since there is not much country have corporate income tax rate lower than 10%, I think. And the coexist with guilty, it's quite interesting for me because, well, you know, we all know how powerful the US is. Once they decided to jump on the wagon regarding the global consensus, they can change a lot of things in the proposals. This is, I think, really similar to the Pillar 2, but this is non-unilateral measure. And why it is not unilateral measure, to be honest, because it could be one. It shouldn't be coexist, not only because the potency of double taxation with the Pillar 2, but also it gives sense that you give the right for the US to apply their own unilateral measure while the other country have to delay it. I know it's not really the same with the DST, but in a sense, it gives you, it likes the US already has their own measure regarding the low tax from the CFC owned by the US citizen. So it's just like a unilateral measure for me. I think the guilty should be just erased, and the US should just apply the Pillar 2. So I also need to talk about the Indonesian approach here. As you know, as Mr. Pons already explained at the very beginning, so we already have the government regulation in lieu of the law.
Sorry,
Number
Mas
one.
Iqbal, you have 2 minutes to go.
Okay, 2020, we already have the PAT set for the digital seller with the 100 million rupees per month every year and 12,000 users per year also. And we also have income tax base. We also have new tax. I mean, Indonesia, in terms of the unilateral measures, is one of the most comprehensive country because we already tried to address it with the PAT system, with the income tax systems, and also we try to have our own DST. So if the UK only has DST, then Indonesia has it all. So what happened with Indonesia? What happened with this regulation after the consensus has been reached? I think we still have to find out in the future. And the implication of the purpose of the government regulation is it's quite severe actually, because Indonesia, the US launched the investigation on Indonesia in 2020 for being targeted the US companies, and whether we will have to review again our regulation regarding that, because the retaliation, like David says, not really good. So what will change? What will happen to the government regulation in lieu of law? I think Indonesia is one of the G20 member. We will see that the regulations probably will be delayed, or I mean, it will be postponed. But it is still interesting because the implementation of the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 will be on 2023. Whether we will see the new tax in Indonesia applied to wait for the real implementation of Pillar 1 or Pillar 2, or we're just gonna keep it like this. And the exclusion of extractive sectors could be a benefit for Indonesia. We always know that Indonesia always famous as the country with a lot of natural resources. So it's a very good thing when the extractive sector is excluded from the Pillar 1. The question is, can Indonesia take the gain as a source country for the natural resources? Okay, I think that will be the end of my presentation. Thank you so much, Dinar, and all of the audience.
Thank you so much, Mas Iqbal. That was a very exciting presentation. I enjoyed it clearly. I couldn't even write any details because they all seem very important. And I think Mr. David here have a very specific comment about your presentation, as he puts me earlier.
Yes, no, look, thanks very much. And Iqbal, some excellent and very insightful comments. I wonder, you had a slide there that had a summary of all of the questions. Would it be possible for you to just quickly launch that? And I might just offer a few comments in response, if that's possible.
Sure, I'm gonna
Because I thought they were all excellent questions and exactly the sorts of questions that we should be
This
asking.
one, right?
Yeah, that one
This
there,
one?
that's excellent.
Okay, sure.
So firstly, the 15%, will it be enough? You cited the EU Tax Observatory data. We actually, in the impact assessment that we've done, we have vastly different figures to that. We believe that there is significantly additional revenue coming to Indonesia than what is described in the EU Tax Observatory numbers. A couple of points to add there is that that analysis was a static analysis. So it doesn't take into account behavioural reactions of governments or multinationals, whereas we sought to take that into account in our impact assessment. Now, I can't share with you the Indonesia-specific details because I don't have permission to do that. But just to make the point that our assessment is that it's significantly higher than that. And our analysis did not take into account the subject to tax rule, which we imagine will also bring in additional revenue for Indonesia. Will it bring an end to all unilateral measures? Look, I guess it remains to be seen. And that's a question of how robust the process is. But what I would say is that, you know, the OECD is not the international tax police. We've never had a role like that. But if you look at some of the initiatives that we've launched globally in transparency as well as the BEPS project, we have used international peer review processes to bring pressure to countries to comply. And that has been remarkably successful. So I think it would be our intention to continue to use those processes of peer review in order to bring pressure onto countries to ensure that they comply. Now, of course, the bottom line is that we all know that in unilateral measures, the retaliation has come from the US. So if this is not resolved, there will be continued retaliation. So rest assured that the countries that have either announced or have implemented unilateral measures are engaged in very, very close discussion with the US to make sure that this agreement brings an end to the tension that the unilateral measures and trade retaliation has brought. So I think we'll get there on that. You mentioned the Devereux analysis on the change to scope. I can tell you that we have a significant number of additional companies in scope from our analysis. We have more than 110 M&E groups in scope. So, you know, Devereux didn't release the specific list and we're not in a position to release our specific list, but we shared that with the information with countries, and we believe it's significantly higher than the number of companies that they've raised. 2 points. One, that is a fixed revenue threshold. So over time, companies naturally will cross the threshold and will become in scope. Secondly, there is this review to bring the scope down to 10 billion. I should also say that the scope is more comprehensive now than it was last year. So it's not just automated digital services and consumer-facing businesses. There are a whole range of businesses that are now in scope that were not previously in scope, and that brings additional taxing rights for those companies. You mentioned the digital share. I can tell you that our analysis has shown that more than 40% of the residual profit that will be brought into play by Pillar 1 comes from digital firms. And 4 of those firms contribute more than 20% of residual profit. Now, I saw a question in the chat about whether or not low profit digital firms would be in scope. And I think there's a particular company you might have in mind there. I won't name them, but they also have very highly profitable business segments. And one of the things that I didn't mention is that there will be limited opportunities for business segmentation to make sure that those highly profitable firms that might overall have a lower level of profitability will have to pay amount A under Pillar 1. So that will be addressed. Subject to tax rule, look, I guess whether countries are happy or not will be the subject of ongoing discussion, but it is a gross tax. You raise the issue of guilty. I guess the difference between guilty and some of the unilateral measures that are discussed under Pillar 1 is that minimum taxes are something that countries have sovereign rights to implement without being in breach of their existing international obligations through their treaty arrangements. That is not so clear for the unilateral measures associated with digital services taxes. So I think that's important. And also, as I mentioned earlier, Pillar 1 will be a minimum standard that countries will have to implement, whereas Pillar 2 will not be mandatory, but we will be encouraging there to be compliance with the common approach that we're outlining. And look, many other interesting questions there, but I really thought, Iqbal, you put your finger on some of the key questions, and hopefully I've been able to provide some initial responses to that.
I'm
That's
really
great,
happy
David.
to hear your
Thank
explanation. Yeah, thank you so much. To be honest, I wasn't trying to kill the hype of the celebrations, and I'm one of the enthusiast one for the OECD reaching the consensus. I just realized how big the challenges will be for the OECD in the future, not only until October, but until 2023. So yeah, I think I have to give very good luck for the challenges ahead.
No, I completely appreciate that, and thank you for the questions, because like I said, they are good questions and they deserved answers, and hopefully I've been able to help with some of that.
Okay, so thank you, Iqbal. Amazing. Well, we also have some questions from our audiences here that I probably wouldn't be able to address one by one, as there are plenty of them, but I can recap questions from Rafli, Tangis, and Arif Lubis. So I think this goes to all the speakers in perspective of probably international level from David, and how it could be applied in Indonesia. Probably Mr. Franz and Mr. Bono Aji could help with that. The question is, how would be the mechanism at the global level to monitor and ensure the profits calculations? Although Mr. David earlier say basically he's not a tax police, but somehow we have to kind of imagine there could probably a measure that has to be set up. And even more important, the allocation to of the market jurisdiction itself. Would it be possible to provide an equal level playing field between the developed and developing economies, as well as addressing tax competition?
Perhaps if I could have a quick go at that. I think I mentioned earlier that peer review processes will ultimately be the way forward in trying to ensure that everyone complies. And if you look at the BEPS project, take Action 5, for example, with harmful tax practices, that has been a very effective way of ensuring that those harmful regimes have been either amended or repealed. So we would see that being the way forward. In terms of the question about fairness on allocation to the market, I guess once you begin to embrace a principle that involves an allocation of some profit to the market, you are by definition favouring larger sized markets. That's almost inescapable that is going to be one of the outcomes of that exercise. And of course, many developing countries and emerging market economies have been arguing for this over time. And this is a limited shift of taxing rights to market jurisdictions. And there will be questions about whether is 20 to 30% sufficient? Why should it just be residual profit? Shouldn't it be routine returns? At the end of the day, the international tax system will only operate with some coherence if it's underpinned by a broad political consensus. Now, not getting into the detail of whether 131 versus 139 is consensus or not. And the way we operate is that 139 is consensus, not 131. But those 8 that have not joined the framework, they have not said that they're opposed to it. They said they're not ready to join it at this point. So we want to keep the discussion moving, and that's really the way we've been operating. But I think on this question of how much is to be reallocated, in the end, this is a negotiation amongst countries globally. And what is the right answer and what is the wrong answer? I'm not sure that there is an objectively correct answer as to what the right allocation should be. Some countries want more, some countries want less. And in that tug of war, that is an international or multilateral negotiation, as the OECD, we see ourselves as the honest brokers in trying to help reach a common position when countries inevitably start the negotiation from divergent positions. So Yes, there are some countries that would like a 100% allocation, which would shift this into a full market-based, destination-based sales type of corporate income tax system. The truth is that there is no appetite, there is no broad, widespread appetite to make that happen. So the parameters that you see before you, they're not there because someone at the OECD necessarily sat down and said, we think this is the right mark. It's partly because in the course of negotiations, these are the areas informed by evidence and analysis. These are the areas that appear to be opportunity for common ground amongst nations with a divergent set of interests. But there's no doubt that if Pillar 1, for example, were to be implemented, it would dramatically change the way we do international tax. For the first time, you'd be allocating some profit taxing rights to market jurisdictions. For the first time, you'd be looking at a multinational enterprise as a whole, not as separate entities. And for the first time, you'd be recognising a taxing right where there was no physical presence. And as Iqbal said, if you had mentioned these three principles becoming the subject of an international agreement, if you mentioned that in OECD discussions 10 years ago, people would have thought you were crazy. But that is how much progress has been made in shifting this debate in order to respond to the realities of the modern digital economy.
Amazing, huge development. Look back, and I think we're all in a different kind of economy now. So I guess Mr. Franz and Mr. Bowen are also welcome to respond to the questions. How do you think would it be in the case of Indonesia? How ready we are, and are we actually committed to it?
Sorry, can I comment? Add some comment about but from the perspective of Mr. David before. Well, I believe that the digital economy taxation is a significant test to the global tax governance. As we knew that in the Addis Ababa agenda 2013, if I'm not mistaken, some of the developing countries also promote like why don't we create like the international tax organization to ensure every countries have their own tax sovereignty and act like a police in the international tax system. But I believe that that is not the solution. As we can see that the international tax reform, it depends on the G20. So when the G20 give a mandate to the OECD and OECD done their job greatly, so so I believe that the solution on to ensure how the peer review and also to ensure every countries comply with the minimum tax and so on. So I believe that the answer is not the new international tax organization, but the mandate from the G20. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinar. So, according to my opinion, based on the tax administration point of view, is kind of difficult to allocate how to allocate the resources of the income of the jurisdiction review, especially how to collect and gather information such as from the sales of the MNEs that profiting from Indonesia. But the reporting from, for example, from the sales or from the taxpayer from Indonesia maybe could be the collection of information for the tax administrator in Indonesia. But the point is not only also because this is not the challenges from a tax administration only, but also for the MNEs itself, how they comply to Indonesians regulation. This is kind of difficult if they are, for example, they have no PEs in Indonesia, or also even no physical presence, but they need to comply with Indonesian regulation. On this case, we would like to have a special regulation for this kind of M&Es, following by the global consensus. And hopefully this kind of regulation can adopt it for the M&Es which are not having PEs in Indonesia. But again, how to collect the information, how to gather some sales, also how to distribute between the countries to countries. This is the, I think, the main issues also, because here we are categorizing as the developing country. It's kind of difficult to have some data from the transaction which is not cannot be collected from the real transaction itself. So this is still the remain issues, I think, and needs to be like Mr. Bawono say, maybe we need some kind of organization who collects all the data so that we can distribute and in the regular basis based on the transaction from jurisdiction to jurisdiction countries, so that all of the countries can have some fair collection tax revenue, so that it will be the best solution for all of us. I think that's my opinion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Franz. Thank you so much for Pak Bawono Aji. I think we still have loads of questions to address, but I think due to the time limitations, I don't think we can deliver every one of them. But I think the most important points have been pointed out by Iqbal, Mr. David, Mr. Franz, and Mr. Bawono Aji. So it's a really great news that at international level we have reached this agreement of an inclusive framework. However, I think back home in Indonesia, we still need to occupy ourselves with further regulations. And of course, on top of that, the enforcement would be very, very important to apply. So before we say goodbye, I think I'm going to point out two best questions of the day, and I will allow the operator to do a little bit of a ballot for one person who would get the voucher of the book. So kindly do, Ms. Sophia. I think, yeah. So congratulations to Yulia Safitri, because you got the ballot, the raffle to get the book voucher, and you can do the raffle again for 10 people who would be for the raffle for the next grand prize. Another one, sorry. Okay, I guess there's a technical issue, but before I go to the 10 people, oh, here they are. Very exciting. Congratulations to the 10 people. If you stay until the end, I think you have the chance to get some more grand prize, which is a laptop, I guess, or pad. It's pretty cool. So thank you so much for staying. I would like to choose two of our best attendants that drops their questions in the chat box. I would give it to Mr. Tanges from University of Queensland. They have very good questions, and on Mr. Ahmad Amin from University of Gajah Mada, Indonesia. Both your questions are amazing. So congratulations, Mr. Tanges and Mr. Ahmad Amin. We've come to an end of our very exciting chamber. I'm very sorry and apologize not to be able to address all the questions that come up. Very good, but I think all of our speakers will share their materials in which we would add and attach in the chat room, and later on you can download. This event itself is recorded and later on will be available to download and re-watch through YouTube, so you can always capture it again and listen to it more carefully. So thank you for everyone for coming to our session today. Before we close the sessions, I would like to remind you that for in 1 hour time, sorry, in half an hour time, we have another chambers, and you can always check what's going on in our Instagram at isic.ppiuk. And we hope you really enjoy our discussion today and look forward to seeing you again in the next chamber. So thank you. Thank you for our speakers, Mr. David, Mr. Iqbal, Mr. Franz, and Mr. Bawonoji, and of course, the in and out almost 200 attendees of the day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Mbak
Thank you
Dinar.
so much.
Pak Pran,
Terima kasih semuanya.
Thank you banget, Pak Frans.
Frans.
Thank you, Pak Boy.
Should we have a photo
Follow.
together?
oh yeah, of
I'm
course.
very sorry, but I think I captured it.
Oh,
Yeah,
like that.
Okay.
Oke, izin live ya. Thank you semuanya. Sukses selalu, Mas Gatot dan tim Pak Bawono, Mr. David.
you.
Nice.
Frans.
Thank you,
so
Pak
much.
Frans.
Thank you
Mas
all.
Iqbal, itunya bagus tuh researchnya. Nanti kapan-kapan kita ngobrol. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Frans.
Thank you, keren banget.
Mbak Anas, thank you ya. Selamat ketemu lagi, Mbak Anas.
Pak Bawono.
Thank you for all the attendance. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Aita.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, there are still many people just joining us.
Yeah.
I'm afraid they forget
They
this.
don't want to leave. More.
I think when it comes to the attendance in total, considering the people coming in and out, we've reached probably to 250, I guess. Because I've seen couples that are coming in and out.
Yes. And the highest number is 149 and stable in the level 140 to 155. But that's good. It's more than 25% of total registrant. Iqbal, you did very well.
Yeah, congrats to Mr. Iqbal.
Oh my God.
Mas Iqbal.
Selamat Mas Iqbal.
Amazing.
So,
Real
Thank you
expert,
all. Thank you all.
yeah.
just born.
Thank you all attendants. Don't forget to download the PDF.
Thank you, attendance.
So
Yes.
we're waiting for more detail presentation from Iqbal. Yeah. So
You will always be welcome to join our discussion in Intact UK.
Yes. Yeah.
For anyone who's still around.
Yes,
I
please,
think
please
Nadia, you
promote
can
us.
you can stop recording. You can stop the recording.
Oh,
For
sorry.
anyone who is recording, and then
Let
you
me
can
stop.